and welcome to our new episode of The Customer and the Service. I'm Sean Petrowski, and with me, as always, is my co-host, John Lemazny. Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, Sean, how are you?
Doing good, and I was able to do that without us laughing for a change.
Nicely done.
Yes. We got one topic tonight. It's kind of, I think, a big deal for people in the tech sphere. A big announcement today from Adobe, who is one of the largest software companies in the world, one of the largest companies of proprietary software. They are, for those of you that are not familiar, they make Photoshop, Adobe Acrobat, Acrobat Reader, Flash, a bunch of tools that we probably use day in and day out. Maybe you're aware of Adobe, maybe you're not. Oftentimes when I do my work every day, a lot of my faculty use Adobe products, specifically Acrobat Professional for PDF creation and editing and such. And some of my faculty even use Photoshop. And oftentimes when a faculty member comes to me and it says, hey, listen, I need Photoshop, or I need to upgrade to the newest version of Photoshop, there's always a bit of sticker shock that occurs whenever I let them know how much that software costs. And that's even with educational pricing. The standard everyday user has to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars more than a faculty member or a student, which is pretty crazy. We live in a day and age now where software, we can buy apps for our desktops or mobile phones for as cheap as 99 cents. And Adobe, I feel, is one of the few software providers that's still charging hundreds of dollars for their software. We've even seen changes in Apple and Microsoft with their pricing of their software. Microsoft and Apple have dropped operating system updates to as low as $20, $40, $80, depending on what you're buying. Microsoft Office now has dropped in price. It used to be like $350 to $450. Now you can get a copy for about $130. But Photoshop and other Adobe pieces of software are still $350, $400, and it's kind of surprising. And this is why, John, you're probably a fan of open source software, because it's free and you're getting tools that accomplish the same goals, right?
So it's one of the reasons. That's actually pretty low on the list for me about why I love open source software. There's a saying in open source software that open source software is free as in free pizza, but it's also free as in freedom. And the free as in freedom part is the part that I'm particularly interested in. And the thing about Adobe products is often if I'm introducing somebody to open source software, or if I'm doing graphic design with them, or I'm introducing them to graphic design concepts, I will often introduce tools that I use that are not Adobe products, and they'll say, oh, wait a second, you don't use Photoshop? And I'll say, well, I was raised on Photoshop. I started with Photoshop, but I don't use it anymore because I have open source equivalents. And they say, oh, are you talking about that GIMP thing? And I'll say, yeah, GIMP's an example. GIMP is an equivalent to Photoshop. And they'll say, oh, I've tried it, and it doesn't seem like it's as good. And I say, well, what did you try to do that you weren't able to do? And they'll say, I don't know, it just didn't. And that's the thing. It's mostly perception. And Adobe has an amazing brand. They have conquered completely the market for digital photography. They've conquered the market for web development with Dreamweaver and a lot of other related products, with video, online video development with Flash. And there's been a lot of controversy over the years, and there's been a lot of ups and downs for that company. But nobody would dispute that Adobe is the leader in creative software. My argument is that for most users, especially users who are not dependent on Adobe already, or who are experts in, three-dimensional development within Photoshop. This is part of my problem, is I'm not sure why there are three-dimensional tools inside of photo manipulation software. But to those who love it and those who pay the thousands of dollars, they expect to have a list of new features every year that enable them to continue to upgrade. And so, I think of Adobe's Creative Suite as perhaps the most bloated whale of a product ever. I do not need to do three-dimensional editing within Photoshop. I might want to work with 3 dimensions inside of Illustrator, which is their vector-based illustration program. And that leads me to other pieces of software in the open source world. There's Inkscape, which is easily my favorite application in the world, especially for graphic design, illustration, and working on web graphics, etc. The thing is that most people assume that Adobe is a superior product because it has the market share. And any competitors have to face that comparison. Is it as good as Photoshop? Is it as good as Illustrator? Is it as good as InDesign? Is it as good as whatever? And my argument again is that despite the fact that it is free of cost and has the extra added benefit of being free as in freedom. In other words, I can take the code and modify it if I wish to, or I can give it to a developer and ask him or her to make changes to the software. I cannot do that with Photoshop. I feel like most features, the ability to work in alpha layers, for example, that's present in Photoshop, also present in the GNU image manipulation program. The ability to work with histograms, the ability to work with channels and layers, the ability to work with a Wacom tablet and a pen, a stylus, the ability to do color correction, the ability to apply filters. All those things that are present in Photoshop and expected by most users are present in the GNU image manipulation program and are equivalent in functionality. I do graphic design now, especially as a living. It's one of the ways that I make money. And I would not be able to rely on a tool that did not allow me to take what's in my mind and make it real with software. Inkscape, the GNU image manipulation program, Scribus, and other open source tools do that for me. I do not miss any of the features that are present in Adobe products. And in fact, whenever I get the chance to look at one of their products and see its latest incarnation, I sort of think, why is all this other stuff in here? What? And then I remember, oh, they had to convince somebody to spend another $700 this year, and so it's got more bloat. That's my argument about Adobe, and I am highly biased, with all due respect to Adobe, because it is a great piece of software. It does amazing things, but there are other packages of software that do not have the threshold of cost that do those same things. And that is my argument for open source software. That was one of the first things that got me really excited about open source, was my introduction to the GNU image manipulation program, and subsequently Inkscape, which I have become highly familiar with over the last several years, using it mostly for my 365 Sketches project. So I think it's interesting, though, that Adobe is moving to the cloud or to a subscription model, because it will make it easier for them to continue to rake in cash. They won't have to do so much convincing every year, because subscription doesn't work that way. You just sort of set a subscription and you forget it. You assume that it's a part of your budget, and if you are a professional graphic design office, you just consider it a large part of your budget, probably. This will make it easier for Adobe to continue to maintain the expected presence that they have. In the same way that Microsoft Office and Microsoft Windows and so many other companies work. It's just a part of the landscape, and so there's an expectation that you're going to have it present.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue of freedom with open source, and because I think that this move to the cloud. So we'll explain now a little bit more in depth. From now on, you will not be able to go to Adobe's website, buy a license, or get a CD mailed to you. You will only be able to basically, you'll have an account that you sign into with a special app that then gives you access to basically an online connected version of Adobe's software that you can only use, in the cloud.
So is this sort of like moving the key server structure that they've had for a very long time to the cloud as opposed to a local key server?
My understanding is that the actual software, will run with some sort of online connectivity. So, you might have to activate every, few weeks or days, online in order to be able to use the software.
So are you saying you need to be internet connected in order to use the software?
I would imagine that there needs to be a check-in probably every month or every year, depending on what their billing cycle is.
But it is a local install then. It will continue to have standalone desktop applications.
From the looks of the screenshots that I'm looking at right now, yes, that is what it's looking like.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, when we're done with this discussion, what you think about the idea that Xbox may require internet connection. You know about that story?
I do, and there was a big update today, and we'll talk about that later because I think this is a good compliment.
Yeah.
But the thing about now, this is the thing that I've always kind of, even though Adobe software has been expensive, if you purchased Acrobat version 8, and you bought that 5 or 6 years ago, you could still use that today with no problem. There's nothing that prevents you from creating PDFs with it, securing it with certain additional options. Of course, there's new features that came out in 9 and 10 and 11 that maybe you need, but the basic core functionality is still there. And so, you spend that $130, $150 for Acrobat, and 5, 6 years later, you're still good. You're still good to go. Now with the current model, you got to spend that. You have to be in that subscription cycle to have access to that software. You're being forced to upgrade, and of course, it's great to have new features, new software, but you're locked in. There's, the days of just buying that CD, having that key, are gone. Typically, a lot of faculty I work with, they won't upgrade their software until it will not work with the operating system that they're using. So if they get a new machine and the new machine is not compatible with the old software, then they'll upgrade. So they'll typically get 5 or 6 years out of a piece of Adobe software before they're upgrading.
So you remember too, Adobe recently made Creative Suite version 2, I think, available completely for free.
Yeah.
And everybody went nuts because they said, "Oh, I can get a Creative Suite for," and I said, "There's no benefit for me because I already have these tools, and they've always been free."
That's right. So there we go. So now they're saying you're going to move to $50 per year. Which is for some people that okay. So if I'm an Adobe user, right, $50 gets me access to. Let me look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 3, 18 pieces of Adobe software for $50. And if I'm a hardcore Adobe Creative Suite user, that's a deal, right? $50, I get access to all 50 programs for the year.
I imagine the people who have been paying for Adobe licensing for a very long time see this as a great change.
Absolutely, but I see this as another major software developer going down the slippery slope, of DRM, restrictive DRM software.
Well, how is that any different from the way that they have always been? Adobe in particular, if we're talking about DRM and Adobe, that company has been working to make it impossible for non-licensed users to use that software forever.
Well, my opinion is they've done a pretty bad job of that, and this is probably, they're probably doing this in response to piracy. I think that's obvious, and this will definitely curtail pirating in the future. I'm sure pirates will come up with a way to download these apps, unlock them, but it will not be as piracy of Adobe software will probably not be as prevalent as it's been in the past.
Well, and I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the way that a lot of these packages used to work, and especially in graphic design and sign making and peripherals. You used to have to install a dongle. Have we talked about this?
Yeah,
You
we
used to have
have.
to install a dongle that had a circuit in the dongle, and if the dongle was present, you were able to run the software. If it was not present, you weren't. And this is essentially a software-based dongle that
Exactly.
says, yeah, you're not going to be able to do this unless you have this little key. And there's a million ways to do it. But it's in their model. This makes sense. In my mindset, I wish that there was a lower threshold of entry, because there are a lot of people who could be fantastic designers but don't have the tools because Adobe is so restrictive with their pricing. It's such a high threshold of entry.
The thing that bothers me, though, is for the, again, I'm in agreement with you. There's really only one software that I think that Adobe makes that doesn't really have a really great equivalent open source tool, and that is Acrobat Professional.
Oh,
Uh,
Premiere too. There are not great video editing tools. I mean, there are lots of great video editing tools, but not in the open source world.
well,
And
that's
I
good to
say
know.
that reluctantly because I wish there were.
Yeah, so
They're-
that's 2 out of 18. So you have 16 other pieces of software that you probably can replace with an open source tool. But the thing that concerns me the most is, we've seen 2 major software developers move to cloud based solutions. Now, Electronic Arts recently just launched their SimCity game. The next version of SimCity was completely online, requiring a persistent internet connection to play. And if you've been following the news at all, there's been a major debacle there, in the sense that the infrastructure that EA put in place to support the simultaneous connections was not robust enough. People couldn't play the game for almost a month. Blizzard software, makers of the Diablo 3 game, had similar issues 12 to 18 months ago with the launch of Diablo 3. Same problem, always persistent internet connection required, not enough infrastructure in place. So just imagine, I mean, I would probably say that there are more people buying Adobe software than there are buying SimCity or Diablo 3. And
I would argue almost guaranteed.
yeah, so does Adobe have, I mean, EA, let's not kid ourselves. EA and Blizzard, 2 of the largest software makers, there's billions of dollars that these companies have at their disposal, and they were not able to dedicate proper resources for the infrastructure needed to run this, when they launched. Is Adobe going to fall into that same trap? Am I going to be a graphic designer who's not going to be able to use Photoshop for 2 weeks because Adobe's having server problems?
Well, that's very possible. But I mean, and better yet, if I don't have internet connectivity or not regular internet connectivity, does it preclude me from being able to use the software? That's very problematic, because there is a recent statistic. I don't have the source, so take it with a grain of salt. That 30% of people in this country do not have ongoing regular internet access, broadband certainly.
Yeah, no,
And
that statistic is right. I use that statistic myself when I teach my management information systems course, and that's a statistic that shocks my students.
yeah,
In our country, and it's typically middle America where there's a lot of problems, and because the population doesn't justify the infrastructure. And I know the Obama administration has taken strides to kind of improve that, but from what I'm hearing, it's still really not any better than what it was. You know?
Well, and you know, internet connectivity, especially comparative to other countries like Japan,
Hmm.
internet connectivity here is at a premium. And you know, we've had video issues on my side, and part of that is because I've gone to a lower tier of access. Because it's not, I with a budget you have to make choices, and you know, there's a certain amount of broadband that I'm able to afford, and a certain amount that I'm not. I would love to be able to have a full bore, uh, you know, channel to the internet, but it's the difference of like $30 a month. So, which is much higher than what Adobe is asking for its software.
Right.
You know, so it's one of these things where you have to make choices. So, do I want any connectivity, or do I want full bore connectivity where I can do everything at a high rate of speed? Well, sometimes you have to compromise. Um, Comparative to Adobe, to use the analogy, I don't feel like open source software is a compromise. I feel like having to be connected all the time in order to use the software is kind of a compromise. I don't know if it's a misstep because their users will probably do it.
Well, you know, let me jump on the bandwagon with you. It's not every day where I jump on the open source bandwagon, but this is an area where I'm in total agreement with you. I'm a user myself of many open source tools in this space. I use Paint.net, which is an open source graphic editing tool that, you know, if you were to do a one-to-one comparison with Photoshop Elements, which is the light version of Photoshop, and Paint.net, those, I would say there's one-to-one the same features in there, and there may even be some more advanced features from Photoshop that are in Paint.net. Free utility for Windows operating systems, been using it for years, absolutely love it.
I have a question about Paint.net, and this
Sure.
has come up before. Paint.net is often um, indicated as an open source product, but I think that it's rather just freeware.
Um, let's find that out right now, because
Yeah, I'm
from
looking.
my understanding, it's always been open source, and that is because it was developed at the University of Washington State University.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, so I don't believe that they can charge for it because it was developed. It is freeware, so it is freeware, but decompiling is allowed based on the license.
That's that is problematic for me. Open source software typically has uh, an open source license.
Hmm.
An example of an open source license is the GNU General Public License that says, for example, you may not distribute the software without an easy way to get to the source code from the same source. Also, the source code, if it's modified, modifications, especially if you choose to redistribute the modifications, must be sent back to the originator of the software. So there's all these really check and balance oriented um, things about capital O, capital S open source software or Libra software that say um, very specifically the emphasis is not on the free monetary cost of the software, but rather free access to the way that it was built.
So here we go. Here's straight from the horse's mouth, which is on the Paint.net blog. As of November 6, 2009, Paint.net was open source. The source code was released. However, it was never an open and collaborative project that accepted unsolicited code submissions. They decided to switch to the freeware model because they were having issues where the code was being plagiarized and being sold for profit by other entities. So you know that was permitted under the MIT license, more or less, according to the blogger. And they were the developers of Paint.net were not happy with that, and therefore that was the move to freeware.
It's definitely a more liberal way of thinking about software. In other words, there are actions that you can take the part of the reason that you have a license at all, as opposed to making it public domain, is to say, according to these rules, you can use this software. And if when you click on the EULA for Windows or Internet Explorer or any proprietary piece of software, there are lots of rules. But even with uh, open source software, with like the GPL at its core, you have certain responsibilities as well. And so you can't just take the code and make changes to it and distribute it as a new piece of software. There are certain responsibilities in returning those changes back to the originator. So it sounds like it was not a good fit as far as the license was concerned, but they would have been able to take action if somebody did that. If they were able to look at the software and determine, for example, that it was based on their source code, they would be able to say, you have to cease and desist because you did not give us the beneficial changes back to the project.
Well, so just want to let people know that that tool's out there. It's not open source anymore. That was news to me. We just learned that right now. But I still love Paint.net. John loves GIMP and Inkscape. And
by the way, I don't mind Paint.net. A lot of people swear by it.
Yeah. Well, you're just not a Windows guy, so that's why you're not hip to Paint.net.
Yeah. Well, I do use Windows, but less often than probably Mac OS or Linux at this point.
Okay, so let's move on to that second topic, which I feel like is a good complement to our discussion. So we've talked about this a couple times. We've been talking about what's going to happen with the Sony PlayStation 4 and the new Xbox. Today there was a big news story, courtesy of Ars Technica. The headline: the next Xbox will work even when your internet doesn't. So the rumor has been a persistent internet connection would be required by the Xbox in order to play games. Now, according to a leaked email that was sent to full-time employees working on the next Xbox, Microsoft, the email quotes as, the next Xbox is designed to deliver the future of entertainment while engineered to be tolerant of today's internet. There are a number of scenarios that our users expect to work without internet connection, and those should just work regardless of their current connection status. Those include, but are not limited to, playing a Blu-ray disc, watching live TV, and yes, playing a single-player game. So those are three areas right now that most people would use their Xbox for now, an Xbox 360, which does not require an online connection. They would use those three features in an offline capacity. So hearing that should put a lot of the gamers that were concerned about this at ease, hopefully. We will know soon in the next couple of weeks if this is true, because Microsoft's got a big event scheduled for about in a week or two where they're going to reveal it. And hopefully all the answers will be answered, all the questions will be answered there. But it appears that will resolve that. Then they're saying there's a question of, will the games require a one-time activation like Steam? Where you put the disc in the drive and it connects online, registers it to your Xbox, and then you can play offline, or or if it will do some other sort of activation. We don't know. But it's we also don't know if used games will be blocked. There's still that rumor of being able to buy a piece of software secondhand and putting it in your Xbox and playing a secondhand copy. It's still up in the air that there may be a requirement that only new software will work with the new Xbox.
In relationship to the conversation that we're having, I wondered if you had heard any feedback from people about the presence of Steam on Linux, because I have downloaded it, was not a big Steam gamer, but like some of my favorites, like Portal, for example, are not able to be played on the Linux distribution of Steam. Has there been any fallout because of that?
I actually do have quite a bit of knowledge about what's going on in the Linux space for Steam. Valve has been very aggressive about porting their software titles to Linux. I know that most Left 4 Dead 2 is available. I believe Portal 2, the sequel to Portal, is available.
Portal 2 is.
Yeah, and slowly but surely the legacy games are being ported over. So like the older Counter-Strike and Half-Life 2 games and Half-Life are being ported over to take advantage of that. Valve has really been concerned with developing a platform that will be successful in the Linux environment, because for years the thing that's held Linux back from being a viable game platform was driver support for 3D video cards. And Valve seems to have taken that battle on and been successful in that space, working with NVIDIA and AMD to develop reliable drivers to give good performance. The feedback that I'm hearing from gamers that are able to play the certain games that are available on Steam and Linux is that the experience is phenomenal, that the performance is better because the operating system is much more lightweight, not as resource intensive as OS X or Windows, and that Valve themselves has said that the performance increases for the Linux versions have been incredible. So this is why Gabe Newell, the head of Valve, has been embracing Linux, because they're loving the performance increases that using the Linux platform gives them. There's been rumors that Valve will be developing what they call a Steam box, which will be basically like a set-top box that'll connect to your TV and be able to run all Steam software, and it'll be based on Linux as well.
Yeah, I thought that was sort of the whole point of moving to Linux for Steam, was that they were they were trying to develop for the standalone black box that was going to be Linux based, and this is almost like a dogfooding period, I think, for whether it can work.
I think it's with what work they've done already. I think they've proven to themselves that it's possible. It's just an issue now of porting software over and getting the developers that are the major parts of the Steam ecosphere to port their software over as well. I know they're coming up with tools to port the code over quickly and easily. Some developers have taken advantage of that, others have not yet. So there's still some growing pains with that, but I think that the infrastructure is in place to make it successful. And, I think there's definitely a strong possibility that Linux will be a successful gaming platform, in the coming months or maybe even years. Just to confirm, none of the Portal games are available on Linux at this time.
I thought that Portal 2 was...
Portal is only available on Windows and Mac at this time.
Yeah, if a game is available, it will have... it uses some keyword. It doesn't actually say Linux. It says whatever, cloud something.
Steam Play, but they are now including the Tux logo for Steam Play for Linux-enabled games.
Because it was a little bit confusing, actually. You would go in and it would say Windows, Mac OS. It would not say Linux. It would say Steam Play, and there was no clear indication that meant for Linux users.
So now, if you actually go to the Steam store, I'm looking at it right now. I can screen share with you if you want.
Sure.
If you take a look at my screen, there's now from the drop-down menu, there's now a Linux option for games, and this is the store, and then it gives you this front store face, and it lists the newest releases. And as you can see here, my mouse is pointing to the Steam Play icon. There's Windows, there's Mac, and then there's the Tux Penguin.
That's new.
Yeah, and I think they've done that now. There's games that are cross-platform multiplayer, so you can, play with friends that utilize Windows or Mac versions, which is cool. It's a big thing to be able to do cross-platform. And let me just take a look real quick about look at the Valve software and just see what we have right now. Yeah, see, they don't even have the Tux icon listed next to their software at this time. So there we go. Team Fortress 2 has it. You can play that. That's officially supported. I know Left 4 Dead is, and Counter-Strike has got it. So they have some games that are available. The super old Valve games, the original Half-Life, the original Team Fortress, all available there. Day of Defeat. But the newer titles, not yet. We're getting there. But I would imagine that probably by the end of the year, every Valve software will be available.
I guess I was a little bit surprised about Portal in particular because it is such a geek classic.
Oh yeah.
And so you would think that there would be a strong push to have that present, because that, I think, is what would we say, sort of a gateway game for so many users. Portal is one of these things where if you're not really into shooting games or you're more into puzzlers, this is like a transitionary thinking shooter.
Right.
So I don't know. It just seems like such a lost opportunity there.
Well, I would say it will not be a lost opportunity for too much longer.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, John, before we wrap up tonight's episode?
I don't think so, Sean. Tonight was fun.
Okay, great. I look forward to seeing you next Monday.
Next Monday, I promise I'll be here.
All right, great. See you then.
Talk to you soon.